Welcome to Faith 2020 and Union Theological Seminary in New York's event today, our virtual event in Pennsylvania. My name is Reverend Adam Phillips, and I'm so glad you could be with us for this important conversation, Prayers and Petitions, Millennial Leaders Forging the Future. We're so grateful for our co-sponsors, Union Theological Seminary in New York City, the Riverside Church in New York City, Esperanza in Philly, and Red Letter Christians. We have Reverend Frederick Davey of Union Seminary who is going to open us up with a word.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you everyone for joining today. I want to say Union is very pleased to be able to support this program of young leaders, millennial leaders, and others coming together to talk about important issues of our time, particularly now, and particularly from a perspective of faith, from a place of faith. It is crucially important that these voices, young voices, are heard in the public square. And I want to thank all of the co-sponsors of this conversation. And we hope that it's more than just a conversation, but it's a catalyst for engaging in the public square around these issues as we face one of the most crucial times in our nation's history, with the election coming on November 3rd. So I just want to, again, thank everybody, welcome everybody. I'm going to have to slip away, but I'll be back. I know it's going to be a fruitful and rich discussion, and then we'll have a lot of good follow-up on the other end. So thank you. And I want to turn it over, I think, to my very good friend and colleague, Max Finberg. Max.
Great. Thank you, Brother Fred and Reverend Davey. Appreciate that and wish you the best. One of the neat things is having worked together professionally when Fred served President Obama's...
I'm back and ready if you guys
are. When he served on President Obama's Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnership Advisory Council. One of the things that brought people together of all backgrounds, all faith traditions and those without. And it was neat to then see him a year ago when he performed the wedding of one of my closest friends at the Riverside Church in New York City. So with that, I wanted to just add my welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are online and virtual in the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection, but throughout the Keystone State, and due to the current pandemic, not in person. So just want to say thank you again to everybody who's made this part of your afternoon and look forward to it. So with that, I wanted to turn it over to my friend, Reverend Eli Valentin, who is a proud alum of Union Seminary in the city of New York, as well as an instructor there, but also a pastor at the Bridge Church of God in Allentown, where I got to join him last week in following the dictates of his faith in feeding the hungry. And that's what he and his church were doing. So I've asked him to open us up in a word of prayer. And just wanted to say at the outset, we are intentionally and robustly pluralistic. We want to make sure that everyone is welcome. You are, please pray and speak in your own from your own tradition and perspective. We have invited folks of all traditions and backgrounds to join. But with that, Reverend Valentin, if you would.
Thank you, Max. A pleasure being here with you all today. Let us pray. Creative Spirit and Lord of all, we recognize your presence in this gathering. We give you thanks for those gathered here, those that continue to be on the front line of our quest to make our country and indeed our world a better place. Give us strength, courage, and the compassion necessary to make our vision of a more just world a reality in our midst. In the name above all names, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Eli. I think especially during these times, I figured this was the good prop to start with. So my friend, Stacey Abrams, who started fair fight to make sure people could vote. She has these purple masks. So I was wearing one in Philadelphia last week, and Damaris Cortez, Reverend Luis Cortez's wife, took one look and said, "I love it. Purple is my favorite color." So it's a good thing I had two, because she's got the other one. But with that, let's get started. So what we've set up this evening is 7 elements or intersections of justice. And I'm so excited to have a robust group of friends and folks who are going to share with us on different ones. So criminal justice, economic justice, environmental justice, food justice, gender justice, health justice, and racial justice are 7 aspects. As my children will tell you, I can't do anything without the biblical symbolism, so it had to be 7. So fortunately, we made it. We don't have respondents for every single one, but we got 7 of these elements. So with that, and with no further ado, I wanted to kick us off by introducing a friend of mine and a resident of that Philadelphia that we are live and broadcasting from, sort of. Shane Claiborne is the co-founder of A Simple Way. That was a group of friends trying to live out their faith, coming off of their experiences in college, and then went on to help to co-found with one of his former professors, Red Letter Christians. He's written books, he's done a bunch of stuff, but what's coolest is he's a modern day blacksmith, and he will literally follow the passages from Isaiah and Micah, and I know that we're excited. Oh, he's going to get a prop. I knew it. See? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Blacksmith Shane to kick us off on criminal justice.
I didn't know you were even bringing that into it. Yeah, these are made out of donated guns, which we've got plenty of in Philadelphia and in the U.S. We've got more guns than people, so we've been inspired by those prophets, Micah and Isaiah, to beat our swords into plows. So there you go. But I got to stay on point tonight. You got a preacher here with 7 minutes, so I'm going to get right into it. Criminal justice. Here's where we find ourselves. We're staring in the face of the largest prison buildup in the history of civilization. Over 2 million citizens in prison. The U.S. has about 5% of the world's population, but we've got a quarter of the world's prisoners. 1 in 4 of the world's prisoners here in the U.S. There are more African Americans in prison and under judicial constraint today than there were slaves in 1850. When it comes to the costs of all this, beyond the human lives and dignity, it costs us 4 times more to keep a person in jail than to send somebody to school. It's about over $70 billion a year to maintain this prison industrial complex. And to make things personal, in Philadelphia, as schools were going bankrupt, dozens of schools were being closed at the exact time that a $400 million prison was being built just on the outskirts of the city of Philadelphia. So one of the things that we hear a lot about is a school to prison pipeline, because literally the budget for our mass incarceration system, one of the indicators that they use to budget for our prisons is the dropout rate from our schools. We've been much better at incarcerating than educating our young people. And right now, 1 in every 3 African-American boys born today, 1 in 3, can expect to go to prison. That should just stop all of us in our tracks, right? And yet we kind of have come to think that we abolish slavery, but there's so many great resources. The 13th film, Michelle Alexander's work in the new Jim Crow, Douglas Blackman's book, Slavery by Another Name. And what they all show is that we didn't end slavery. It just evolved. And now we see a new iteration of racism and inequity. in our criminal justice system. Literally, the 13th Amendment did not abolish slavery. It said slavery is abolished unless the person is convicted of a crime. So now we have folks in prison. Half of them are there for crimes related to economics or the drug economy. And many of them are hired to do work for 23 cents an hour, sometimes $1 a day. Business experts point out that prisoners are one of the most profitable workforces in America because you don't have to pay them even a minimum wage. And so we see companies like AT&T, Microsoft, Eddie Bauer, Boeing, Target, Victoria's Secret, all using prison labor. And so the profiting of prison labor is one aspect of this, but it's important too that they make war supplies. So I'm a believer in nonviolence, as you see from my converted guns here. But prison labor has been used to make Patriot missiles used in Iraq, helmets for folks working in the military, uniforms, and this is one that hit me, Max, is even the vestments for military chaplains have been made in our prisons. And so as we think of prisoners, making everything from lingerie for Victoria's Secret to packaging coffee at slave wages, this is a major justice issue. So, I remember watching this film where the documentary, I think it was called Downsize This, Michael Moore's film. And he said, I got an idea. Let's just close down all the factories. And in the ensuing days, people will inevitably turn to some sort of underground economy or look for ways to make it. And we can arrest them for illegal activity. And then we'll open the abandoned factories up as prisons and hire them back to do the jobs that they're already trained to do. But now we can pay them 23 cents an hour. So like that's may seem a little dramatic, but it is actually very much the exploitation of people and the new kind of manifestation of racism. We can see it in the mass incarceration. I want to say just a word about the death penalty because we can see the residue of 400 years of slavery and racism really clearly there. Literally, the states that held on to slavery the longest are still the states that are holding on to the death penalty. Where lynchings were happening 100 years ago is where executions are happening today. So yesterday, a groundbreaking study from Death Penalty Information Center released this study where they showed these are you may not be able to see this perfect. This is the best I can do at PowerPoint on Zoom, but this is, you can just see where those dots are. Those were the lynchings in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And these are the executions that have happened. So as we look at the movement from lynching to executions as we see them today, in 1950, African Americans were about 10% of the US population, but they made up 75% of our executions. And literally what was a capital crime for Black folks was not even a crime at all for white folks. We can see all of that. But now, fast forward 70 years later, and this is what we know is that African Americans still are about 12%, 13% of our population, but they make up almost half of our prison population on death row and over a third of our executions. So the clearest determinant of who actually gets executed is not the atrocity of the crime, but it's arbitrary things like the resources of the defendant, the race of the victim. When the victim is white and the defendant is Black, it's a deadly cocktail. So we believe, that we're often killing the worst of the worst when it comes to the death penalty. But the truth is we're killing the poorest of the poor and disproportionately people of color. So when it comes to this election, this is an important one as we hear about law and order, or we hear even about the death penalty. We've got one candidate who's against the death penalty in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We've got another who's a very big fan of the death penalty. And just to make that crystal clear, we went 17 years without a federal execution until this year. And the federal government, through Donald Trump and William Barr, have begun federal executions, superseding state's jurisdiction over this. And so we've had 5 executions just this year, which is more than we've had in 57 years combined. So I just want to say that this is a political crisis, but it's also a spiritual crisis, because many of the Christians were on the wrong side of slavery, white Christians. Many of the folks who watched lynchings in public worshiped on Sunday morning. Many of the people who continue to defend the death penalty today are claimed to be Christians. And so literally 85% of our executions are happening in the Bible Belt. The Bible Belt is the death belt. So this is a spiritual crisis. But here's why I'm hopeful, is because I think more and more people are seeing the contradiction between our mass incarceration, our death penalty, and the good news of Jesus. Millennial Christians are overwhelmingly against the death penalty. And what's the alternative? Is restorative justice. This biblical concept where righteousness and justice are bound together. And literally, like criminal justice is asking, what did they do wrong? And how can we punish them? Restorative justice, biblical justice is saying, what wounds were inflicted and how do we heal those wounds? It holds out the hope that even those that have inflicted wounds can be a part of healing those wounds that they've inflicted. As Desmond Tutu says, the grace of God is big enough to heal both the oppressed and the oppressors, the victims and the victimizers. So I will close just by saying that I think 400 years of history still shows itself. The racism and slavery of our past continues to raise its face in our criminal justice system and in the practice of the death penalty. And we can't get our future right until we get our history right. And we don't want to move back to the any season in the past. We want to move forward together. And I'll just make it personal by saying I think proximity makes a world of difference. That you can hear all these statistics, but until injustice becomes personal and has a name and a face, it's hard to get that fire in our bones. So this is a letter I've got on my desk from one of my friends who was on death row. And he said this: just as I was sealing up this letter, Shane, I got moved off of death row. After 30 years, I walked on grass a few seconds ago. I walked on grass for the first time in 30 years. And then he says, God is good. God is good. And we've got some work to do, because this is not the kind of world I think that God wants us to have, or the kind of country that God wants us to have. Thanks for letting me share.
Amen. Thank you, Brother Shane. So that was great. Luke, I'm teeing you up momentarily. But knowing that you're from Tennessee, Shane, originally, before hanging out in the Keystone State, a friend of mine from Tennessee sent me this: for the love of God, vote 2020. All right? Enough said.
Enough said.
Luke is a recent graduate of Haverford College, right outside of Philadelphia on the main line. Having played baseball there, graduated, is now involved in political organizing, and was so excited when I told him about this because he wrote his senior thesis on criminal justice. So with the prayers and petitions of Generation Z, bring it, Luke.
Thank you, Max, and thank you, Shane, for those incredible words. So yeah, I think Shane covered a lot of the present data and statistics and realities, which, you know, obviously make it abundantly clear that this is a bigger issue in the United States than anywhere else on earth, and that, but also our criminal justice system clearly and intentionally targets Black and brown people. But I think I want to speak to some of like the more conceptual realities of crime and punishment in America. So, you know, when you talk about the death penalty, overly harsh sentencing laws, prison labor, and all the other issues that Shane touched upon, I think everything in this realm of criminal justice directly relates to and contradicts the core value of forgiveness. You know, we know that every human being is a product of their lived experiences and the world around them. I think that we have broadly failed to comprehend like the vast majority of crime is not a product of people being inherently bad, but is actually more a result of, you know, intentional economic and cultural forces. So if we want to care for the least of the, it means more than donating to charities for poor people and bagging lunches. It means recognizing the tangible systems that keep poor people poor. And I think mass incarceration is one of the largest obstacles to fixing issues of race and poverty in America. And honestly, it makes poor people even poorer, not just keeps them poor. And so beyond our values as people of faith, the whole concept of judging people by their worst mistakes has never really sit well with me personally. I think we need to be more intentional and conscious of the real effects punishment can have on individuals, but also communities. So this is sort of part of what I touched on in my senior thesis, but this concept of, it's called community disorganization. And so it's basically that highly incarcerated communities and individuals from those communities face so many consequences of mass incarceration way past the individual level. So, you know, when you put millions of fathers and husbands and uncles and cousins in prison, or when you tear family structures apart and then criticize the family values and solidarity of those communities, when you remove massive levels of income and financial support vessels, which, you know, are the people who get incarcerated themselves, they are contributing members to society. And when you have such consistent cycling in and out of people and communities from prison environments that are, you know, so filled with trauma, it becomes really hard to establish shared norms and shared values in these communities that are ravaged by mass incarceration and over policing. So I think it's just to summarize, and this is, I guess, a lot shorter than I thought it would end up being, but to summarize, I think we need to look at the totality of what crime and punishment means in America, and, you know, who specifically wears the brunt of that crime and punishment.
I think that's an invitation to write Dostoevsky's sequel, Crime and Punishment 2. No. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Shane. That is our first of the elements or intersections of justice. You guys did justice to the topic in the allotted time, and we are grateful. Next up, because we're going in alphabetical order, is economic justice. And I am thrilled to be joined by a father-daughter team in sharing on economic justice and the response. Rabbi Josh Runyon and I have some mutual friends and connected through them, and am especially grateful because he and his daughter, Mags, as we'll call her, as her friends do, and the rest of the kids are getting ready for the head of the new year. So as many of you know, our Jewish brothers and sisters will celebrate Rosh Hashanah tomorrow, so an especially prescient time of preparation for that. And so Rabbi Josh, are very, very grateful that you could join us, bringing your kippah as well as your tax attorney hat to bear on this question of economic justice. Would you please share a little Torah wisdom with us?
Thank you very much, Max, for the opportunity. I truly am honored by it, and I will attempt as best I can to honor you, our host, as well as all of our guests, to stay within the allotted period of time. When I think about economic justice, I first think about all of the different types of justice philosophers have identified. In my own faith tradition, there are many words for justice that are used in the Torah. Words like tzedek, din, mishpat, and they all mean different things at different periods of time. But what does justice itself mean? In college, where I studied political science, and then later in law school, I learned about distributive justice, procedural justice, retributive justice, and restorative justice. Applied to the realm of economics, we could argue that she who has been unfairly taken from should be made whole. That's restorative justice. We could argue that he who has unfairly taken should be punished with fines and or taxes. That's retributive justice. We could argue that this person should get X and this person should get Y by virtue of the totality of their own circumstances. That's distributive justice. But in Hasidic thought, particularly as refined and explicated by the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson of righteous memory, I identify justice writ large with the concept of another Hebrew word, tiferet, which means beauty, but it means something much more. It means it's a level of godliness at which two polar extremes, that of kindness and severity, and as parents, those of us who are parents know that there are times when we're very kind with our children, and then there are times when we are maybe not so kind in a revealed way. There's times when we give, and then there's times when we cease from giving. But those are actually two opposites. The realm of tiferet, of beauty, means that they can exist at the same time without canceling each other out. That, to me, is the level of justice that I think we should animate our economics, should animate our concept of economic justice. In the realm of economic theory, that means that we should be pushing for an economics that is both emblematic of capitalism on the one hand and socialism on the other, of a system that both strengthens and empowers the individual as well as the collective. At that level, we can see that all of the economic policies that we as progressives hold dear, vital issues such as a living minimum wage, a social safety net, charity, a rational tax regime, were present thousands of years ago when the Jewish people, as we believe, were given the Torah at Mount Sinai. We see it in the half shekel that went to the tabernacle and then later the temple and was applied equally, a tax that was applied equally to the poor as well as to the rich. But we also see it in the corners of the fields that had to have been left unharvested so that all who were hungry could come and take. We see it in the prohibitions against usury and the mandate to forgive loans at the Jubilee. But even a system that looks to both the individual and the collective cannot be complete unless we as a society turn upside down the very way we think about the economy. For far too long, we have looked at poverty as the root of society's ills, unfairly maligning the poor for the plagues of crime and disease. But as recently demonstrated in an amazing book, which I highly recommend, Social Vision, in which sociologist Philip Wexler articulates a new way to see the world as discerned in Rebbe Schneerson's teachings. Such problems are not rooted in poverty. They are rooted in a culture that champions materialism and personal wealth as the ultimate accomplishments and actualization of the human self. We don't have a poverty problem. We have an affluence problem. Far too many, and primarily among those of wealth, see their purpose in acquiring such wealth or in preserving that which they were born into, as to prove, as the prophet Zephaniah railed against, I exist and besides me there is nothing. But that's wrong. God exists. We are subservient to God. As people of faith, we realize that we are not the center of the universe. This must be the primary recognition of all of society. The fact is, it is just as criminal to engage in so-called white-collar crime as it is to deal drugs, and yet we focus on the latter because we as a society still believe that wealth is solely a creature of merit and that poverty is the root of our problems. And ask anyone about the image of poverty they have. Even the rural poverty is a very real phenomenon. The poverty that most people in our country think of when they implicate the poor is the urban poor, most of whom are people of color. But poverty isn't the problem or the source of the problems. It is instead a symptom of a system that is unable to care for its least advantaged citizens. The poor have merit, just as the wealthy are the source of many of our problems. We face injustice of a massive divide right now, and it is up to us as people of charity to do our part. And it is up to our government to help us along. And when the government fails to do that, it's up to us to institute change. Companies shouldn't pay a minimum wage because without it, workers will live in poverty. They should pay a minimum wage because human beings deserve to be able to provide for their families. Wealth does not belong to the wealthy, as those who have the spiritual imperative to give. Wealth belongs to society. Those who are wealthy have the responsibility and obligation to be productive members of this society, just as they would apply that responsibility to those who are poor. Everyone has talents that they can use for the benefit of others. Max, as you said, it is Rosh Hashanah tomorrow, the beginning of the Jewish New Year. Judaism believes that on this very holy day, so holy that it lasts for 2 days, the entire world is renewed. It begins again. We have the power to change the world because the world is created anew. And ultimately, it's not just every year. The world begins anew each day. Creation is a constant process. So the charge to each and every one of us is to be agents of that change, to promote a justice that is fair, an economics that is fair, and an economics that values every single one of us. And we can do that at the start by voting come November 3rd. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Take it away, Esty.
All right. You had your say, Dad, but it's my turn now. The past decade has seen our country go through extensive changes, shall we say.
Is it just me, or did we lose her?
I think she dropped off, unfortunately.
Mags, can you hear us? What you can do, Rabbi, is get her on your cell phone, and
okay,
she can then plug in from your video feed so we can hear her, because what she's saying is fabulous.
I am calling her right now.
She probably won't answer. Well, she just dropped off, so hopefully that'll work. As we are all familiar with these pandemic days, there's technology and there's technology. Oy, oy, oy. Huge thanks, India. As you've seen, Shane was able to respond to your question just on some of the list of companies that benefit from prison labor. So there's that there, and there's a lot connected.
Esty, if you would like to share your thoughts, I will put you on speakerphone so that it'll be picked up on the Zoom. Okay?
Okay.
All right.
The internet just cut out. Like.
Well, we can blame the corporate giant of Comcast.
Yes.
Okay. Let's test this. Can you all hear?
Yep.
All right, Esty, you have the floor.
All right. I'll start from the beginning because I don't know when you cut out. So this past decade has seen our country go through extensive changes. Issues such as climate change and now the coronavirus have forced everyone to rethink how their actions affect everything, including the economy. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, America has adopted the economic mindset of the machine. Regardless of whether or not you operate under a capitalist or socialist economy, and this country very much so operates under a capitalist economy, there's a fundamental flaw that has seen not just our country but the world, and that is the lack of empathy. When we begin to view people as cogs in a grand machine, their value determined solely by their ability to reel in profit, this is what dooms an empire to fall. This pandemic has unfortunately brought this sorry truth out, but it is only a microcosm of an issue that's been plaguing our country for far longer. How often have we passed a homeless person without a second thought because we thought, well, they must have been dealing drugs for some other reason, they must deserve it? How often have we heard the phrase handouts and thought, well, we shouldn't be giving people free money? It's not handouts. When we help others, we help ourselves. And unfortunately, we can't rely on the government or the economic elite anymore to do their part because they have proven their indifference. Money is important, yes, but people are what make a society. The greatest and wealthiest empires have all fallen. Why? Because of the stark imbalance of wealth. I pray we don't let our own empire, well, technically America is not imperialistic, but if you look at the dealings, it's pretty much so. But I fear we may be too late. It's not that there isn't enough money, which many people have argued, citing the grand debt the American government is in, but the fact that it's all been hoarded by an elite few. It's up to us whether we turn the tables otherwise. It's up to each and every one of us to check ourselves and ask ourselves, what is more important, people or profit, empathy or enterprise? Internet just got back. You there?
We're here.
All right.
That was beautiful. Amen.
Exactly.
Bye.
Terrific. Thank you. And oh, there she is, back up. Now, maybe we'll come back to this to find out how you became such a Marvel Comics fan to want to be nicknamed after Magneto, but we'll hold that for now. But all the best with senior year, and may it be an especially sweet new year. Next up, we have environmental justice, tying it in with the creation itself. So I am thrilled that Gabriela Pais is able to join us. Gabriela's Dominican, lives there in Philly, and has worked with the community in a variety of different roles. I'm excited to have her share a little of her story of how that intersects. She, like Shane, is a graduate of Eastern University, and then went on to get her master's at UPenn, which is where the Howards both are, and we'll continue with all that. But Gabriela, we are excited for you to share with us a little about environmental justice.
Yep, thank you. And I'm excited to be here too and to share with all of you. So yeah, I wrote some kind of reflection so we can connect our faith and people of faith and our responsibility in terms of the environment. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I describe myself as a person of faith, a follower of Jesus, and also a lover of science. I have a science background, so I went to school to study science. And to me, learning about science was learning about God. So everything about nature and the way that things work and the laws that govern our earth were very inspiring to me and to my faith. Later on in my professional career, God placed me in a position to take action and lead by example. I started with Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And if you read this passage in Genesis, there's a phrase that repeats over and over again. And it's that God saw that it was good. Everything that God created was good and it was perfect. But then we get to the point where God created mankind. And at one point, God asked men to, depending on the translation that you're reading, to rule, subdue, reign over the earth and everything in it. And I want to focus my message kind of in this command that God gives men. Other versions say that God asked men to govern over the earth. And I'm bringing this because at one point I had a conversation with a faith leader, and to me, right, people of faith should naturally be concerned about the environment and be proactive about protecting the environment. But he brought up this verse to me, and that some people of faith see this as God asking men to take dominion over the earth instead of protecting it. I was shocked at first, kind of thinking about the way that sometimes we use scriptures to fit our agenda or whatever we want to believe or whatever we want to do. The way that I see this passage in the Bible is God asking us to be stewards of his creation, to be good rulers. Because you can be a bad ruler or be a good ruler. And we all know what happens, right? When someone is put in charge of something, it can be a country, it can be a company, it can be whatever. If you are a good ruler, those who benefit from that country, from that company, that population will benefit. But when you are not a good ruler, everyone suffers. So God has called us, people of God, not to be people who dominate the earth irresponsibly, but he's asking us to, again, be stewards of his earth, or the earth that he placed us in. And something that I am working personally right now with my pastor is asking the question of how can we, and I'm sorry because I'm reading like my notes here, it's kind of hard to like follow, but how can we better serve the community that God has called us to serve? So how can we look at not the four walls or just coming together for service, but how can we again go out there and be the light that God has called us to do? And today, I want to encourage like people, everyone, especially young people of faith, to step out of those four walls and to look at their communities and feel those needs. And that takes organizing the neighborhoods, getting out of the four walls and cleaning up. That's also something that we can do to protect the environment. Organizing churches and our people of faith and our networks and planting trees. So now, especially with the pandemic and everything that's going on in the world, more than ever, we need to be moved by the impact of our irresponsible dominion of the earth on the most vulnerable. We must be moved by the thousands of kids who suffer from asthma because of the air pollution and the lack of trees in the neighborhoods. We must be moved by the pain of many who walk out of their homes to see mountains of trash, junkyards, and dumping sites. We must be moved by the thousands left homeless by the action of climate change. We must be moved by the fires, the flooding, the hurricanes. The earth is literally crying, and the people of God cannot remain silent. And something that a lot of other panelists have brought up is the lack of empathy. It's the fact that if it's not affecting me, it's not my problem. But guess what? That is not the God that at least I serve, who's calling me to cry with those who cry, to feel with those who feel. God is calling us not to live in our own worlds. He's calling us to put ourselves in our brother's shoes. And when it comes to the environment, whether we like it or not, it affects all of us. But we know, right, we're talking about the economic justice here in other areas, that it does not impact everyone equally. And that the most vulnerable are the ones who suffer the most. So yes, we need to be good stewards of the earth that the Lord, that God has given us. And we need to step out of our comfort zone and be proactive and active in protecting the earth that God has given us. And yes, if it is a problem for someone else, it is a problem for me. If there's people on the other side of the world who are losing their homes because literally the sea is eating them alive because of our actions on this side of the world, that is my problem. So I think that is, if we start there with empathy, there's a lot that we can do. So again, I'm just calling people of faith and everyone to get together to fight for climate and environmental justice. Thank you. That's all.
Gabriela, when I was growing up, there was a bumper sticker that said, "Think globally, act locally." And I'm wondering if you could take another minute or two to share a little of what you've done in Hunting Park in North Philly to put that into practice.
Yes, definitely. So my work for the past 6 years has been very focused in the neighborhood of Hunting Park. And that's why I say that churches need to take a look at the communities that God has called them to serve, right? They're all located in somewhere where there's a need. So for the past 6 years, I've been organizing the neighborhood to look at the environmental needs and fill those needs. We have given away nearly 1,000 trees to be planted in people's yards with the city of Philadelphia. I also developed a partnership with the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society to create the first ever bilingual tree tenders training. It was only in English, so part of my job is to see how can we break those barriers that keep people from getting involved and from taking action. And one of those was, again, the language barrier. So now there's a group of around 50 residents in Hunting Park who plant trees, take care of the trees, and check them periodically. Over 100 trees have been planted as part of that program. 50 more will be planted in November, and I will make sure that all of you get that information, because if you want to volunteer, you can volunteer. That's November, I believe, 21st. But Max, I can share that with you, so whoever wants to get involved can get involved. And what's good about this is that churches can create their own tree tenders groups to plant trees around the neighborhoods where they're at. They can, get their youth trained. I am a youth leader, and all of my youth are trained to plant trees and participate in plantings. And that's what we need to do. We need to engage our churches in meaningful changes. And yes, it happens at the local level. It happens with small things that can definitely make a huge difference.
Great. Well, I'm excited to connect you with Rabbi Josh and his family, because then in January, there's a different Jewish New Year, the New Year of the Trees, when it's their commandment to plant trees. So I could see a
great
interfaith service project in the works right there.
Yes,
perfect.
Definitely.
That would be beautiful.
Yep.
Right? So
absolutely.
To Bishvat. So one of the things that I look back on finally is I was able to work with the Jewish Day School and others in Washington to do a tree planting on the National Mall with the guy in charge of the entire Forest Service. So it was pretty neat. And I'm excited for what's going to happen in Philly.
Yes.
The student who was going to respond to Gabriela unfortunately couldn't make it, but Stephanie Rodriguez is a youth leader as well. And the name of her church is Agua de Vida, Water of Life. So it was a perfect fit. I'm sure that's why Esperanza found her, but unfortunately she wasn't able to join. So we're gonna move on and go over to another Esperanza alum, Barbie Izquierdo. I met more than 15 years ago when she was participating in a Drexel University program called Witnesses to Hunger. And now she has gone on, she's a minor celebrity. I just got to put it out there. Yeah, it's true. If you check out A Place at the Table, it co-stars Barbie Izquierdo. So, you should just do it. I mean, it's pretty cool. But I am excited to have her share a little on our next topic of food justice. So Barbie, go right ahead, all the way from Lancaster, PA.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me and that lovely introduction. That still makes me a little shy, but we're going to move forward. So I want to start off. I had a whole idea of what I was going to say and how I was going to say it, but I believe that when you're called, you have to listen to these things and just go with it. So I want to thank Shane for mentioning Desmond Tutu. He's like one of my favorite philosophers, and I wanted to start off with one of my favorite quotes that he said, thanks to you, Shane. So it is, we are a wounded people, all of us, because the conflict of the past. No matter on which side we stood, we are all in need of healing. As members of the commission, we were ourselves wounded healers. And if you've heard me speak before, I am very much one of those people who calls themselves a wounded healer. What has brought me here today and on my journey at all has been my lived experience. So I can share with you the most recent statistics of hunger that are out there. According to the statistics available from 2018, there are 302,685 people who are struggling with hunger in Philadelphia. That was the number as of 2 years ago. It's translated to 1 out of 5, every 5 residents has suffered some sort of food insecurity or hunger issue. I'm here to tell you that where I come from, that same neighborhood in New York, in Hunting Park that Gabriella was speaking of, that's not what it looks like in those neighborhoods. The blocks are filled with homes who are struggling. Our neighbors help each other. If someone's cooking a meal and a family doesn't have enough to complete their meal, you can knock on the door and we feed each other. Those sort of experiences granted me the drive, I want to say, to not only see the differences between where I grew up and how things are in different parts of the nation, but also that we deserve the same treatment. I started my journey sharing my story about my difficulties with feeding my kids and trying to keep a job and being on welfare and dealing with the cliff effect of how when you qualify for these programs and you get a job that might put you $1 over the income limit, all of a sudden you don't qualify for any other programs, everything is cut off, and you have to sort of make it on your own. This journey for me has been a really deep struggle. I had to expose my life, but more importantly, I had to expose the lives of my children. And for the rest of their lives, there's a documentary out there talking about the fact that their mom couldn't feed them. And what I hope that people gain from watching the film is that, yes, I was up there and dealing with the shame of talking about those things, but I'm also a fighter. And I made sure that if I was sharing my story, I was sharing them in avenues where they mattered and where it counts. Because too many people from the neighborhoods that I come from and a lot of other disenfranchised neighborhoods all over the country believe that their voices don't matter. They believe that what we're given to us or the resources that we have available are all that is out there. We also have to deal with being placed in the mentality of when you grow up in poverty, you are only but so smart, you can only go but so far. And it's just not the case. I've been living my life for the past 13 years trying to show people that we do matter, we are smart, we just don't have the same opportunities that everyone else has. But when you do give us a platform to speak, we not only stand up for ourselves, we stand up for our communities, for our families, for our leaders, for our businesses. You know, we just don't have the same opportunities afforded to us because we're already counted out. Right now, during the pandemic, not only do we have to face the issue of hunger that's been going on for years, but now people who have never faced hunger, never faced food insecurity, have had to deal with it, especially when the pandemic first got here. If it wasn't the lack of food because people either had to hoard the resources from their supermarkets because of fear, or the accessibility of not being able to just go to the store and get things anymore. The lines at the food banks have gotten longer. The organizations providing food don't have the same amount of funding that they did to help the communities that continue to grow while the hunger numbers continue to grow. And this is just something that I can't sit back and deal with. You know, I strive to motivate others to understand that they're worth it and that you can fight for something that you believe in. And one of the most important things that I believe in is that hunger is not a privilege. Food is a right. No one should be going through it. And we have enough resources. We have enough food available. It's just the fact that it seems as if society has this mentality of when we help one person, we're taking away from someone else, instead of just thinking that this is a human life and they need help and we should just be able to help them. COVID has taken a lot of lives around the country. And unfortunately, you know, we've dealt with families watching, you know, a lot of documentaries now that talk about children who haven't had the right access to food, who are malnourished. We have to take the time to look at how food insecurity and obesity go hand in hand. A lot of people think that they're two completely different spectrums, and it's not true. When you live in a neighborhood that only grants you access to unhealthy foods at cheap prices, this is what we're going to consume. When we don't have the nutritional education available to us in our neighborhoods, this is what we're going to consume. When we don't have access to doctors, to health insurance, all of this goes hand in hand with food insecurity. And at this point, the last time that I can remember that anyone mentioned putting hunger on the map was the Obama administration. And with this very, very, very important election coming up, this is something that should matter to everyone. $4 million have been cut from the SNAP program already. That means that so the SNAP program stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So we know that this program is only supposed to supplement what families cannot provide on their own. However, with the unemployment rate affecting millions and millions of people across the country, before the pandemic hit, the millions and millions of people who are already suffering from hunger, like the problem is just increasing, and we need to do whatever we can to put this problem back on the map, to make people aware that hunger is trauma. So not only are we affecting people's minds, we're affecting their bodies, we're affecting their abilities to learn, to focus, to thrive, and we have to pay attention to the generations that come after us. If right now all the students are at home, trying to learn because they can't go into a school building, and parents are working, and these schools were providing either free or low income reduced meals, where are these children going to get their meals from now? There's a lot of problems that have become more realistic to families who have never had to face this before. And I just honestly think that, it's time. I would love to meet more people who are willing to be open and share their story just as I have, but I know how hard that is. I know the difficulty of having to stand up and say, this is my life. This is what I've been through. I've had to live in a house where my electricity was off, my gas was off, my water was off, and I had 2 kids in that house asking me, Mom, what are we gonna eat? And I have to tell them, well, you have to go to bed, because I didn't have the heart to tell them, I don't have anything to give you right now. This has to stop. We have to become better as a society and work together and build within our communities, so that no one else has to go through this. And it's my personal mission to continue to empower and motivate people to make these changes, but most importantly, to let them know that their voice counts. And yes, doing this type of work is painful, and it draws a lot from who you are, what you believe in, and even times, what you think you deserve, and creates even an inferiority complex. But just as I'm out here sharing all of this, I know that there's many people out here who don't have this platform and this opportunity to share this. So I'm here representing not only my neighborhoods, but single moms, single dads, full, families who just don't have enough because minimum wage is too much. There's too many hours to work. Food is too expensive. There aren't enough access to resources. And this is a problem that is solvable. We just have to work together to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbie, very much. And would you mind giving us your autograph afterwards? Just kidding. Thank you. So what is fitting, and what I'm very grateful for, we had our partners with Esperanza were able to identify a student at Esperanza Academy in Jondi Suarez, who, like Etsy, is a senior, and he's gonna share some of his prayers and petitions around being able to eat and food justice following Barbie. So Jondi, thanks for joining us. You're up.
Yes, my name is Jondi Suarez. I am from Philadelphia, and I'm a student from Esperanza Academy High School. And I am a Christian, and we people of faith, we know that Jesus came for the downtrodden. He came for the poor. He came for those in need. And in America, we have a huge hunger problem. It seems like those that are down below, especially in places of minority, we are affected tremendously. And we need to remember that the Lord came for the downtrodden, for the poor, and us Christians, we should always have a drive to help the poor, to help those in need. And a few scriptures that I have here that are very, very beautiful. And it's Proverbs 22:9, and it says, the generous themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor. So that's something that tells us right there that we can be generous with the world and just express the love of Christ that he showed, and just push Jesus. And through Jesus, we can get these things done, because there is no other greater example. And another verse that's beautiful as well is James 1:27. And it says, pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans, widows in their tribulation, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. These are very beautiful verses, because it reminds us not to be prideful and just thinking about ourselves, when in the world we have other people that are hurting and have less than us. And that just pushes a focus to us, to the viewers, and to those that are just experiencing life, to always remember about those that are down below, the innocent and the vulnerable. And one thing we also have to remember, that not just as Christians here in the U.S., we have to remember that all over the U.S., all over the country, and all over the world, we have a hunger problem. And there's many problems in this world. And another problem that we have to not forget is those that are innocent as well, those that are in the womb. As Christians, we should not advocate for those things. We should not advocate in the promotion of sin. We should promote righteous standards of living that are aligned with our Christian values. And these are just things that I want those viewers and all of us here to remember, that we need to promote holy lifestyles. And that involves also in who are we voting for, our politicians. We need to view it through the lens of the Bible. And yes, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, John D. As one of the other verses to take a look at next is the one the rabbi mentioned earlier. Leviticus 19 talks about what James then repeats later on. It says, leave the edges of your field. Why? To care for the widows and orphans. Because back then, food was plentiful, not just as it is now, where we got plenty of food, but you could access it easily because you lived by a farm. Doesn't work quite that way now. So we have intermediary organizations oftentimes that do that. But anyway, I don't want to digress too much. I actually care about this a great deal and have spent my career working on making sure hungry folks can have something to eat. It was an amazing experience to me in India, where I met my first Sikh person. So you'll often hear it referred to as Sikh. The Sikh tradition is that everybody has to serve. So in India back then, the prime minister was Sikh, not ill, but of the Sikh tradition and religion. And he too would volunteer at his temple, providing a meal to those who were hungry. And I was astounded that it would apply and across the board. So Barbie and John D, I am very grateful. Thank you so much for giving us your wisdom around food justice. Next up, we have Dr. Leah Howard, who is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Her focus is wellness. Exactly. Better give it up for her, otherwise you're sleeping on the couch, Chaz. No, just kidding. So I am very excited, Leah, to have you share a little on your perspective around gender justice.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And I've just been so deeply encouraged by each and every person who's presented. I thought I'd get a chance to look at my notes and gather my thoughts, and no, I haven't had that chance because I've been so deeply just enamored with your words. So thank you for all who've shared and all who will share. Just to keep it real before I get started saying a few things, I want to say that I want to talk about women in the United States. And when you living through this pandemic has been an experience of living in both, when you talk about work-life balance, we have it all at once, all the time. And today for me was no exception. I mean, I have 3 girls and 2 are in high school, and they are all over the place right now. They're texting me, pick me up. It's just intense all the time. And I think we're all getting it. I have like a mime doing everything. Chaz is right next to me, but we're getting all, men and women are experiencing this work-life balance right now in ways that are really amazing and interesting and frustrating, but it allows us all to see. The Greek word apocalypse, many of you know this already, but it means an uncovering and a revealing. And I think COVID-19 has been that for so many people, getting a glimpse into what it looks like and feels like to be a working mom and to be navigating all these things. So I thought that 2020 would be an opportunity. Back in 2019, I thought 2020 was going to be all about the 19th Amendment, the 100th anniversary of a woman's right to vote. And I have this mug that I drink out of to remind myself that that's what I thought 2020 was going to be all about. And of course, 2020 has been anything but. 2020 has been quite intense. But what the 19th Amendment reminds us is that we're a country that in 1787 ratified a constitution that made it so that only half the population, and then even less than half the population, could vote. Women couldn't vote till 133 years later. I mean, sometimes just think about that. 133 years later, finally women were able to vote. And when women started thinking about that, they probably did. I mean, Abigail Adams and others were probably advocating and doing certain things that didn't make the historical record. But we first start to hear about women at Seneca Falls in 1848. What's so interesting, so they get together to think about, let's give women the right to vote. While they were gathering, another group of women were gathering because they didn't want women to vote. And so what's so fascinating to me is to look at the women who didn't want the right to vote. And if you look at some of their speeches, which I highly recommend, I'm not going to excerpt any right now, many of them thought it would destroy the family. They thought that if women voted, it would destroy the family. They thought that it would distract women and that they wouldn't have time to do what they should be doing. And so what's fascinating about that is that the patriarchal norms were so deeply ingested by some folks that they would rather not have an opportunity to govern themselves and to participate because it might put something in danger. And those strands, those arguments didn't die in 1920 when the 19th Amendment was passed. Those strands of argumentation are still present. And what makes me sad as a Christian is when those arguments appear in the church. And it's hard because they're subtle. I mean, sometimes they're not subtle, I'll be quite honest. But when they are subtle, that's what makes me sad. And it makes it hard to be a thinking person that wants to advocate for other thinking people that are women. And I mean, I'm just talking about the gender imbalance in terms of men and women. There are other gender imbalances that we could talk about here. But that makes me sad and it makes it frustrating because it's really hard to change that narrative and to tap in such a way that people of faith can understand that empowering women, giving women a voice, making it so that our government, right, there's vast power imbalances. We know in the House, there's 100 representatives, yay, that are women, but that's only 23% of the House of Representatives. There are 26 female senators, and yay, but that's still just 26% of the Senate. look at the cabinet positions, you look at the fact that there's never been a female president of the United States, and that the demographic, when we were in 2016, a large percentage of Hillary Clinton's own demographic voted against her. We see that what happened, the arguments, the anti-right to vote argument, it doesn't really have a name. It's repeated in different ways today. And so what I would love to just leave you with, again, any woman on this call could say it better than I am saying it now, but what I'd like you to do is just leave you with is just those ways, those complex and entrenched ways, the systemic ways that patriarchal norms work their way into our conversation, into our churches, and into the ways that we think about what family life should be. Because it's not a zero-sum game to allow women to lead companies and to be directors in Hollywood and to be president of the United States someday, to be academics and to think and lead classrooms. Even though we don't have a ton of images of what that looks like, it's not a zero-sum game. It doesn't destroy the family to have that. It actually makes families stronger. There's all sorts of research about young children, if they see their mothers empowered with voice, speaking and advocating, what it does to them in their development, how it gives them confidence and strength. So I remember when I was, and I'll wrap this up in just a second, but I remember when I was in high school and I was sitting in a church sanctuary, and it was a church sanctuary that I loved, with people I loved, hearing things I loved, and reading scripture, which I loved. And I remember it was Mother's Day, and they were doing a, slideshow of like all the reasons and video of all the reasons why they love their moms. And I remember that not one child or dad talked about their mom's mind, their mind. It was all about her heart, which is great. And I love that women have heart. That's so great. But what I want to leave you with is just encourage women in their minds. Women, Princeton University did a study. They're trying to figure out, Princeton allowed women in 1970. That was the first time a female student could go to Princeton. And they did a study, why aren't, since 1970, the study was 2010, why aren't women in leadership positions? Why aren't women students doing these things that we want them to be doing? It was because they hadn't been encouraged. At the end of the day, they found out that if one professor told them, you'd be great at that, or if one professor said, gosh, that was a really brilliant argument that you just made there, they were more likely to be leaders. And I think our country we've benefited in so many ways from the female voice, and I think we need it more. And there's so many opportunities to vote in 2020. There's so many, Kamala Harris and wonderful women on different ballots. And to not be a complex thinker, don't allow the life choice argument to get in the way, because life is huge. There's so many complex ways to talk about life. The pro-life thing doesn't have they don't have it all. There's so much to being pro-life, and that's pro the whole life of people that are incarcerated, people that are hungry, people we've heard about already tonight that are part of that vote. So I know Pennsylvania, we have pro-life Democrats. We have a very complex way of thinking about this. Don't let the culture war keep you from voting. Thank you very much for letting me talk. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Leah. We're glad to have had the better half of the Howards first. There you go. So UPenn is one of the only Ivy League schools that has a woman president. There are two. Help me out. Oh, never mind.
Sorry, no, you might be right. You might be right.
I think there's another one now, but it was one of the first, I'll put it that way. And you had mentioned the study from Princeton. Ramona Romero is the general counsel at Princeton University, first Latina ever to be the top lawyer for an Ivy League school. I had the privilege of working with her at the Department of Agriculture. She, Gabriela, was also Dominican, and it was somebody when she was 11 could move from the island, from the eastern half of Hispaniola here, couldn't speak English. a teacher took a particular interest in her, went on to college, went on to law school, went on to now be the top lawyer at Princeton University. So I'm going to separate the Howard family just because in alphabetical order, after gender justice comes health justice, not racial justice. So we just have two last ones to do it. Reverend Jane Duffield is actually here with us in person, but when we were planning this, she was going to be on a hiking retreat in the Berkshire Mountains, but agreed to it very graciously because of her background and recommendation of a mutual friend to be able to do it, but to record it. So, right, Rabbi Jane, we are very grateful that you would do both. Tyler, you're getting ready to push play. And then in a very unique circumstance, we're going to be able to have Reverend Duffield respond to Reverend Duffield. Yes, there you go. So Tyler, bring up your screen sharing as I introduce her. She's a Presbyterian minister, also a Union Theological Seminary grad, and worked for many, many years with the University of Pittsburgh's Medical Center. So with that, let's go ahead and hit play.
In the midst of an unprecedented pandemic, demanding justice in our nation's healthcare system takes on new urgency. You've heard the statistics. With only 4% of the world's population, the United States has 25% of the world's COVID cases and is in all crises. The poor and the disenfranchised suffer the most. And this is happening as we speak. The unemployed and those with low-paying jobs are exposed to the virus in greater numbers because many live in crowded conditions. Most cannot work from home or afford to stay home when they are feeling ill. Even though the Affordable Health Care Act, Obamacare, is a lifeline for many during this crisis, there are gaps, and the current administration in Washington still tries to eliminate it. But this year alone, 11.4 million enrolled for coverage through the Affordable Health Care Act's marketplaces, and 12.5 million qualified for Medicaid expansion in the nearly 40 states that extended eligibility. And millions of young people under age 26 have been able to remain on their parents' health insurance plans. But this administration's challenges have kept Obamacare from reaching its full potential. So as a result of these roadblocks, there are still too many who are uninsured and underinsured. It should be clear to all who study the issue and read the statistics that it makes no sense to destroy all the progress that has been achieved in obtaining health care for millions more people, to throw out the proverbial baby with the bathwater. Now what we need health care more than ever before. The solution is to build on Obamacare, to take a system that already works and strengthen its weaknesses. Of course, as concerned citizens, we should read all we can about the issue and hear perspectives from all sides. But as people of faith, we also are called to turn to our faith for guidance. As theologian Karl Barth famously said, take your Bible in one hand and take your newspaper in the other hand and read both, but interpret newspapers from your Bible. Now, Barth was not advocating proof texting, finding isolated Bible verses to justify any self-centered preconceived ideas we might hold. But he was asking us to allow the general principles of our faith to guide our decision-making, particularly in the social political realm. And throughout the Abrahamic faith traditions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, on the general subject of healing, there's no ambiguity. All three traditions consider healthcare to be a basic human right, not a commodity to be bought and sold in the marketplace, as is the belief of too many politicians, insurance and pharmaceutical companies, and even some healthcare providers. Healing is seen as a precious gift from God, reflecting God's abundant grace. In fact, biblical scholars tell us that in ancient societies, sickness and disease were so common that no message of salvation would be believed without claiming that the hero, a god or a human, could provide miraculous healing. Stories about healing were used for edification and spiritual instruction. In the Hebrew Bible and the Gospels, repeatedly God heals, restores, and brings salvation through God's agents on earth. So if we believe in God, the creator of all things, then it follows that through the enlightened minds of medical researchers and through the healing touch of gifted physicians, nurses, paramedics, pharmacists, and other medical workers, the divine, God, Allah, continues to work through humankind, bringing healing and salvation to those who are suffering. Our inspired, gifted medical experts, not economists or politicians, are the ones we should follow as we navigate our way through this unprecedented healthcare crisis we are experiencing. So we need to ask ourselves, if we truly believe that our Creator is still active in the world, bringing healing to the diseased, hope to those in despair, and life where death seems to reign, how does this belief influence not only our position on healthcare, but also our position on the other justice issues we are discussing this afternoon? Admittedly, the challenge of fighting a pandemic and reforming our healthcare system are complex, but the moral imperative is not. If we believe that we are children of the divine, then there is no debate about our collective right to be taken care of when we are sick. As people of faith, we need to stay awake, listen, learn, and vote for those whose policies most reflect love and compassion for all of our brothers and sisters, but particularly the sick and infirm who cannot advocate for themselves. For as people of faith, we believe that love trumps hate all the time, and all the time, love trumps hate.
All right. Reverend Jane on video, and now Reverend Jane live. Any last thoughts?
Well, thank you for allowing me to do that. That gave me some flexibility this week. I wish I could have done it live like all of you, but there is a timely message in that I heard Trump this week again in that town hall meeting say that their aim is to abolish Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act, And yet he says he has a better program, but has not revealed it. So that's, I hope that that the media and people press him on, well, what is your program? What is your plan that has been promised for quite some time now?
Well, thank you. Thank you. And it was thanks to Pittsburgh Catholics, Catholic group there, that we got to meet Reverend Jane. So very grateful for that intersectionality, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
So now, to bring us home with number 7 of 7, Reverend Dr. Charles Chaz Howard is the chaplain at the University of Pennsylvania. Thanks to Shane Claiborne for the original introduction, but it was a treat to actually meet both of the Howards for dinner last week, and excited for you, Chaz, to chat a little about racial justice. And we wanted to make sure that your respondent looked exactly like you. So Alex, you're going to be up next. Thanks for arranging the COVID dues together. Chaz, the floor is yours.
It's a blessing to be here with you all. Thank you so much to everybody who has spoken from the heart, and I would say spoken through the Spirit. You all have moved my wife and I, and our girls have been dipping in and out too of the webinar. You're just a blessing. I think it's important to begin any remarks with gratitude. And so to all the organizers, this wonderful event, the team at Faith 2020, and the wonderful Union Seminary, one of my favorite higher educational institutions in the country, and Riverside Church and Esperanza, and team at Red Letter Christians, and my new brother Max, and brother Reverend Wayne, you're gonna hear from in a few minutes. And then I gotta shout out my guy Shane, man. Every time my phone rings and I see Shane Claiborne's name turn up, and I know I'm A, about to be blessed, and B, about to get locked up. And so I gotta give a shout out to Shane, who I think more than most people I know really carries the spirit of John Lewis in him, in causing good trouble. And so it's an honor to share even Wi-Fi space with you, Doc. 400 years of oppression. 400 years of oppression. And we're not talking about something that happened before any of us were born. We're talking about sort of systems that exploit, systems that it literally and figuratively have sort of a knee on the neck of certain people groups in this country. Even as we met on this call, the president was critiquing the 1619 Project, critiquing critical race theory, critiquing those who have the nerve to offer a critical resistance to this country, describing it as unpatriotic, calling out the sins of the past, calling out the sins of the present, being described as unpatriotic, naming what has been racist in our past as unpatriotic. What do you do with that? People are certainly allowed to have their opinions, and I think that's part of the gift and grace we have in living in this country, but there's something very cruel. It's one thing to sort of not want to see and acknowledge suffering. It's another thing to almost ban talking about suffering. There's something very, very cruel about that. And you know when the Spirit is moving at an event, when there's recurring themes, when there's recurring thread to the different speakers. And one of the beautiful sort of things that everyone has named today is the need for empathy. And it hurts so much when our elected officials don't care. You know what hurts just as much? When our neighbors don't care. And so I think before we talk about justice, we have to make a quick stop and pick up empathy along the way. If I can tell a story, and then I'll get out of the way after I reflect on that for a second. A few years back, there was a grandfather in New York City, who was because of economic hardships, selling loosies on the corner, loose cigarettes, not drugs, but loose cigarettes, which, you know, you sort of buy a pack and you sell them stick by stick, and that's technically illegal. It's certainly not the kind of thing someone should lose their life for. And this granddad was sort of put on the ground. There was a knee in his, not his neck, but on his back, and he was an asthmatic, and the words, "I can't breathe," came out. And it was caught on video. And we all saw as Eric Garner's life was taken from him. Well, a couple months later, I remember sitting in a meeting on my campus, and we were talking about the use of technology, sort of in sort of really prescient way, the use of technology in education, in case there's some sort of tragedy, how we can all continue to teach from afar. I remember this very, very clearly. But it was also the day we were going to find out if those who killed Eric Garner were going to be indicted. So I remember sort of refreshing my phone, I'm looking at it, and we see via social media, they did not indict the officers who killed. That's not convict. This wasn't a conviction. This was to sort of see if this was even worthy of going to trial. And they were not. And I was sitting next to two other African Americans in this meeting, and the sister next to me, I saw a little tear come down her cheek because she was looking at it too. And the brother on the other side of me, his fist balled and was shaking a little bit like this. But the rest of the meeting went on business as usual. Light jokes about how students will be using the technology and looking at films instead of following our lectures there, and how they'll be chatting each other, talking about it like jokes and not empathy. I refreshed my social media feed and I saw that young people were organizing a march from 30th Street Station here in Philadelphia, 30th Street Station all the way down to City Hall. So I texted, you know, my better half, my better third. She's only 4'11", but I texted my wife, said, "Babe, I'm not going to be able to make it because I feel like I need to be out there." And so I walked from our campus to 30th Street Station. And it's amazing, the gift and the leadership of young folks, the ability to organize in minutes. I mean, y'all are giving us hope. I'm so thankful for young people right now. They organize, and we're marching down JFK Parkway toward Center City, toward City Hall, just the catharsis of deep pain and deep agony at a space where there is not a lot of racial justice. And so a lot of the chants of the movement were being said, "Hands up, don't shoot. Hands up, don't shoot. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace." And again, that's not saying that people are going to sort of tear stuff up. It's saying, since we have no justice, we have no peace inside. We get to City Hall, where laws in our city are made. We walked through the courtyards, beautiful, beautiful old building there. And coincidentally, there was actually a stage set up there. And they were having what turned out sort of the city's holiday tree lighting ceremony. They were going to be sort of lighting the tree that day, and all these sort of surprise guests arrive in there. And we're still chanting, but then they started sort of going on with their program. They're playing sort of holiday music, and then they had different singers. It was like a bell choir, and we're still chanting, we're saying, shut it down, because they went on with the program as if we weren't even there, as if our pain didn't even matter. They're going to light this old Christmas tree over here and go on with these old rituals and celebrate a homeless, poor man executed by the state, and not pause to grieve over another person killed by the state. The final act goes up there, and it was people dressed as Mrs. Claus, and they were doing like the little routine from that movie Mean Girls, and it was jingle bell, jingle bell, jingle, like doing the whole dance. And we're sort of sitting here just stunned, like they just don't care. And there was one Mrs. Claus who stopped mid-routine, walked off the stage, and came and put her fist in the air, tears in her eyes. That's what I'm asking today, is for people to come down and get in it with us. This, to me, is one of the great refrains of religion in history. I mean, this is Siddhartha, who becomes the Buddha, leaving the sort of protective walls of his father's palace to go and see suffering. and to spend a life trying to relieve suffering in the world. This is the story of Moses, raised in Pharaoh's palace, and leaves to go out and be with, ultimately, his people working for liberation. This is the prophet Muhammad, who sort of leaves the safety of Mecca to sort of get revelation in the mountains and then sacrifices standing to go and share that with others. This is religious leaders in the past. It's Cesar Chavez fasting and risking his own health for justice. It's Dr. King forgetting a life as a professor and going to live in Montgomery. This is Gandhi leaving a legal profession to go and sort of march and change India and change the world. We can do the same, to come down and be with people who are in pain, and then after that, work for change. We don't just come down and cry with. We don't just come down and grieve with. We come down and march with, and we come down and vote for. This is where I kind of want to land with you. We need you to fight on all fronts. This theme of racial justice, these themes of gender justice, of equality on all these, it's a thread that moves through every single category we talked about today. Everything. The environment, the criminal justice system, healthcare, all of that. Which is why we have to fight on all of these fronts to make the past better, to redeem and repair 400 years of oppression, but to work and cast a vision for 400 years of love and equality and life in the future too. We're not fighting for hate. We don't hate. We're not fighting because we're afraid. We are fueled by love. And let me say this at the end. Don't be afraid. This is in the Christian tradition, this is the sort of the refrain of angels. Don't be afraid. Let me tell you why. We win in the end. I promise you that. It is a scary time in our world. It is, with a global pandemic, the economic fallout from that, wildfires out west and reminders of climate change, hurricanes down south, upticks in racist and anti-Semitic and Islamophobic and homophobic violence all around the world. It's really a scary time in the world, scary time to be a young person. But love is bigger. And this is not the last chapter. We're about to turn the page. And I think there's something beautiful on the other side. I really do. And the young people who've been on this call are testimony to that. Thank you for letting me be here with you all. Bless you. Bless us all.
Amen. Thank you, Chaz. Alex de Jesus, who goes to the same barber, is going to provide a response. He is a member of Reverend Eli's church, The Bridge, up in Allentown, and I'm excited to hear from you, Alex. If you would, bring us on home.
Thank you, Max. And yes, indeed, we do go to the same barber. It's exciting to be here. Excited to be here and listening to what everyone has been saying. But I want to be intentional with my time and intentional with my words. I think for a long time, for many years, one of the things that I used to say a lot and hear a lot, one of the things that I've learned was the awareness of the situations and the awareness of what's going on around us and the awareness of the issues, right, and the problems that we're dealing in our country, in our states, in our cities. And growing up in the inner city that I grew up in, I saw it often. And then when I moved out of the inner city, I saw it even more often with the people that I was not able to relate with and deal with what we see with the racism and the lack of racial justice. But as I get older and as I actually begin to have more conversations, I'm learning that more than awareness, there must be action. More than just being aware of the situation, we must be willing to take or to participate to change the situation. Beyond knowing what racial justice is, beyond knowing the issues of racism, there must be something inside of us that drives us to say, I want to do something about it. The scriptures teach us we read, David says, magnify the Lord. And I'm going to take that take its context and apply it here. When we see that word magnify, it doesn't mean to make bigger. In its context, it means to look at it from a different perspective. So if there's anything that I want to pray or ask or have a petition about for not only us, but for people of my age and my generations and millennials and those younger, is that we can change our perspective and not only have awareness, but have action, not only have faith, but also do the work that goes behind the faith. We've been talking about empathy this entire time, and it goes in line with what I've been thinking about and what I wrote. Jesus, when he saw the people in need, he did not attend to their need because he wanted to. He attended to their need because the scripture says that he had compassion for them. So I believe that in order for us to make true change, it is not only to say, oh, I know there's a need, but to make yourself part of that need and have compassion to change everything that's happened around us. I also pray for healing. I believe that healing is needed, especially for those before us, for those that have encountered these issues. I don't know if I hear enough about it, but healing is going to be key because sometimes whenever you don't heal, you begin to hurt. Whenever you don't properly heal, whenever we try to participate in change, it can also almost become unhealthy. So if there's anything I do ask, if there's anything that you remember and this last minute and 45 seconds that I took, it is that not only that we ask for our generations to be healed, but I pray for my generation specifically to begin to have empathy, compassion, and begin to take action. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Alex. And at some point when you're able, ask Pastor Eli the story that Chaz told him that relates very much to this and connects their two families in ways that neither of them knew until dinner last week. It's not just enough to hear about it. We got to do something. So
that's right.
That act piece is now. So I would like to ask two reverends, Reverend Adam Phillips to give a little of closing remarks to wrap us up, and then Reverend Dr. Wayne Weathers I'll introduce thereafter with a little call to action. And then after that, Bonnie Camarda, who's on the phone, we're going to bring on for our final benediction. So with that, Adam, please.
Thank you, Max. It's great to be with you all. My name is Adam Phillips. I'm co-founder and executive director of Faith 2020. We are choosing hope over fear this year. It's a real privilege for me to be with you all in Philly, as I'm calling from Portland, Oregon, where we have such devastation with the wildfires. And I'm reminded that as we choose hope over fear, that we choose truth over lies, and we choose foundations that we don't understand to cling to as we navigate these times of change and climate fires. There's such an intersection of issues here. And so I think people of faith are leading the way when we talk about all of the important issues we've talked about today, whether it's hunger, whether it's racial justice, whether it's economic justice, criminal justice, climate justice, food justice, gender, health. People of faith have got to lead the way. And in fact, this group is leading the way. If you'd like to get involved in choosing hope over fear, especially around the upcoming elections, we encourage you to follow us at Faith 2020 US on all the social media channels, or check us out at faith2020.org. If you'd like to get involved, especially in Pennsylvania with Get Out the Vote efforts, again, the candidates of your choice, we have some recommendations for that, of course, but you can email me at adam@faith2020.org. I'll drop that in the chat here. Again, what's really important is that we make sure that the vote is cast and the vote is free and fair, and we are doing all we can to promote ways in which you can vote this year. And so also I'll drop another link in the chat, request myballot.org. I think I'll check it really quick before I drop it. Anyways, it's been such a pleasure to be with you, and really resonated so deeply, especially with Chaz, your comments on John Lewis. Faith 2020 was founded in the spirit of John Lewis. I got to travel with him to Selma a few years ago, and to see that giant wisdom in a 4-foot, I think 10-inch frame, just towering figure in our nation's history and in our faith tradition. So he's with the saints, and we are so grateful for his life and service and brotherhood. So in that spirit, I grant you peace and every good, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. So there's a famous picture at Selma, actually, and then it was repeated elsewhere, of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel linking arms with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others. And I think just a great testament to what we get to rebuild. But how can we do that, Reverend Dr. Wayne Weathers of the Eastern Keystone Baptist Association? How can we do that? Okay, so Adam stole a little of your thunder because he didn't do a good job. He mission creep on his end, but requestballot.org is one of the ones he mentioned. But what about specifically for Pennsylvania?
Well, thank you. It's a privilege and honor to greet each and every one of you. I'm glad to follow up and hear about the spirit of John Lewis. Personally, took a picture with John Lewis, and as a man of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, John Lewis was a brother of our fraternity. So it's an honor just to even greet you here today. A call to action. How can we take action? The word call is defined as a cry or shout, and action is defined as the process of doing something to achieve an aim. So my goal here today is to provide a cry and a shout so that we can do something to achieve our desired goal. Our desired goal is to vote. The call and cry out today is to recognize that Pennsylvania is going to be a very critical state in this upcoming election. It was just reported that the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania ruled today on a number of election-related issues. And most significant to voters is that drop boxes and satellite election offices are permitted. The deadline to return mail ballots has changed. Now ballots are postmarked by November the 3rd and received by the county elections office by November the 6th at 5 p.m. will count. Naked ballots will not be counted. This means that voters must use the secrecy envelope when submitting their ballots. So here's the call for action. We're calling for you to be registered. Please take your action by October the 19th, 2020, so that you can be registered to vote. Our call is for those who choose to use mail-in ballots to vote by mail-in ballots. Here's your actions. You must register for a mail-in ballot by October 27th, 2020. Let me add, please don't wait until October 27, 2020. With the issues that's going on with the postal services, we are encouraging you to apply for your mail-in ballot way earlier than October the 27th. If you plan on going to your polling place to vote, we're calling for you to vote. Here's the action. The date of election is November the 3rd, 2020. There's a website you can go to, www.iwillvote.com. On iwillvote.com, you can check to see if you are a registered voter. On iwillvote.com, you can register to vote. On iwillvote.com, you can apply for your mail-in ballot. And please understand, and with iwillvote.com, you can also check your polling place. So if you are looking to vote in person, you will know exactly where to go. So the call and the cry is to take action. At a previous church that I pastored, in conclusion, there was one member that said to me, a vote for no one is a vote for someone. I won't let anybody make a decision for me. So don't let anybody make that decision for you. Go out and exercise your right to vote. This is the call to action.
One of the things that's just been so impressive is we have rabbis and preachers who have managed to stick within their time limits. That is a miracle. So thanks to God for that. Reverend Wayne, thank you so much. That is exactly right. And with up to the minute news from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, a bunch of those links are in there. Before wrapping us up and turning it over to the Reverend Bonnie Camarda in a moment for our benediction, I wanted to say a huge thanks. Also on the line is Reverend Kevin Van Hook from our other partner of Riverside Church. I'm grateful that he was able to join this way and as a partner as well, but especially grateful that he provided us with the connection to Tyler, who's over there on my screen. Tyler Brinks is a student at Princeton Theological Seminary just across the Delaware River, except in fact, he's nowhere near Princeton or Pennsylvania right now. But a huge thanks to Tyler for helping make all of this happen. But before turning it over to Bonnie, I wanted to thank all of you for joining. I'm thrilled that we had as many good connections as we did, whether that was Union Seminary alumni, whether it was father-daughter Runyon tag team, whether it was the frickin' lookalikes with Chaz and Alex, oh my goodness, all the way from his home state of Tennessee before coming back home to Pennsylvania, Shane Claiborne. My thanks to all of you as panelists and presenters, all of you who were able to call in from all over the country. We had New Mexico, we had DC, I know we had folks far outside the Keystone State. So with that, a dear woman and an amazing, amazing lady of faith, Bonnie Camarda is both the Vice Chair of Esperanza, as well as the Director of Partnership for the Salvation Army in Southeastern PA. And with that, Bonnie, would you be so kind to wrap us up with a prayer?
Yes, I will. I have heard most of the most beautiful message, and for all of us, the call of action was very clear. Then as I pray and we close, think what is your call of action, how you can go and influence someone in your neighborhood, in your work, in your home, anywhere you are an influence, because you have been sitting here this afternoon hearing the words that it really kind of stirred my heart to really think about what is the future. The future is you. Then with that, I would say I would like to close with the word in the Old Testament, Numbers that we know it well, the priestly blessing. And it says, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Go in peace. May the peace of God, the joy of his work in everything you do, in the name of our Most High. Amen.